in the early 1990s, if you wanted to rob a bank, you needed a crew, a getaway car, and a significant amount of nerve. You had to physically walk into a building, point a weapon at another human being, and hope the silent alarm hadn't already been pressed. It was high risk, high stakes, and frankly, a very inefficient way to make a living. But in 1994, inside a dimly lit apartment at number 12 Malaya Morskaya Street in St. Petersburg, Russia, a systems administrator named Vladimir Levin proved that the ERA of the physical outlaw was dead. Levin didn't have a gun. He didn't have a mask. He had a laptop, a primitive dial-up connection, and a deep understanding of how a monolithic organization like Citibank handled its wire transfers. He managed to steal over $10 million from one of the most powerful financial institutions on the planet without ever leaving his chair. This is the story of the first great digital heist crime that didn't just move money. It changed the way the world viewed the security of the bits and bytes that define our lives. The world in 1994 was a different place, technically. Most people were just discovering what a web browser was. Security was an afterthought, something relegated to physical locks and handwritten ledgers. Banks, however, were already digital. They were moving millions of dollars across borders using a system that relied on the absolute trust of the nodes in its network. Citibank's cash management system was supposed to be a fortress. It was a proprietary network that allowed corporate clients to transfer funds between accounts globally. But Levin found a hole in that fortress. He didn't use a Hollywood-style crack that involved flying through a 3D grid. He used a technique that is still the foundation of many modern hacks. He listened. By intercepting the communications between the bank and its customers, Levin managed to harvest the valid account IDs and passwords of several major corporations. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of how he moved that money across 4 continents while the FBI was scratching their heads, we need to talk about the hardware required to do this kind of work today. Back in '94, Levin was working with technology that your modern smartphone could outpace 1 billion times over. Today, if you want to get into the deep end of data analysis, network research, or heavy-duty programming, your hardware cannot be the bottleneck. If your system hangs when you're compiling code or running a virtual lab, you've already lost the game. VA put a link in the description to a curated kit for building a high-performance PCV kind of machine that actually has the overhead for real technical work. If you're serious about this field, don't let your gear hold you back. Now, back to the Russian who broke the bank. Vladimir Levin wasn't a hacker in the sense that he was looking for glory. He was a professional, working at a company called ADM Labs. He used his knowledge of telecommunications protocols to find a way into Citibank's internal network. Some reports suggest he gained access through a dial-up service that wasn't properly secured. Once inside, he was a ghost in the machine. He spent months observing how wire transfers were authorized. He realized that the system didn't have multi-factor authentication. It didn't have behavioral analysis or AI-driven fraud detection. It just had a set of instructions. If you provided the right ID and the right password, the system assumed you were the legitimate owner of that money. Levin began his campaign of digital redistribution in June 1994. He started small, moving a few $1,000s here and there to see if the alarms would trigger. They didn't. Emboldened, he began orchestrating a global symphony of theft. He would log into the Citibank system and initiate transfers from corporate accounts in places like Argentina and Indonesia. But the money didn't stay in Russia. Levin was smart enough to know that a sudden influx of millions into a St. Petersburg bank would be a death sentence. Instead, he utilized a network of mules. People who would open accounts in Israel, Germany, Finland, and the United States. The money would hit these accounts, be withdrawn as cash, and then filtered back to his group after the mules took their cut. This is the no-fluff reality of a high-level heist. The tech is only 50% of the job. The other 50% is logistics and money laundering. Levin was managing a criminal enterprise that crossed borders faster than the law could follow. By the time Citibank noticed that $400,000 had gone missing from a corporate account, the money was already gone, converted into hard currency in a different time zone. The bank was terrified. If word got out that their unbreakable system could be manipulated by a guy in Russia with a laptop, it would trigger a global run on the bank. They tried to keep it quiet, but the transfers kept happening. $100,000 here, $500,000 there. The total eventually climbed past the $10 million mark. The cynicism of the era was that Citibank, a titan of Wall Street, was being outplayed by a man who was likely earning a few $100s a month at his day job. The FBI was eventually brought in, and they realized they weren't looking for a traditional thief. They were looking for someone who understood the logic of the network better than the people who built it. The break in the case didn't come from a brilliant piece of digital forensics. It came from the logistics. One of Levin's accomplices was arrested in Tel Aviv while trying to withdraw a large sum of money. She talked. Then another was caught in Rotterdam. The walls began to close in. Levin knew the end was coming. He tried to hide his tracks, but in the world of networking, everything leaves a trail eventually. The FBI and the Russian authorities collaborated. Rare occurrence in the 90s to track the origin of the dial-up connections. They traced the signals back to ADM labs in St. Petersburg. However, there was a legal catch. Russia did not have an extradition treaty with the United States for this kind of crime at the time. Levin felt safe in his home city, but he made a fatal mistake. In 1995, he decided to travel to London. The moment he stepped off the plane at Stansted Airport, he was intercepted by Scotland Yard. The subsequent legal battle was a circus. Levin claimed he wasn't a hacker, but a victim of a conspiracy. He argued that the real hackers were his bosses or that the FBI had framed him to show they were tough on cybercrime. But the evidence was overwhelming. He was extradited to the United States, where he faced the music in a federal court in New York. So, what is the legacy of Vladimir Levin? To a realist, he proved that the biggest vulnerability in any system is the assumption of trust. Citibank assumed that their private network was private simply because it was proprietary. They assumed that their customers would never be compromised. They were wrong. Today, we live in a world of zero-trust architecture, of encrypted tunnels, and of constant monitoring. But the ghost of Levin still haunts the industry. Every time a major exchange is drained or a DeFi protocol is exploited, we are seeing a version of what Levin did in 1994. The tools have changed, the speed has increased, but the logic remains the same. Find the permission, exploit the trust, move the digits. If you find this fascinating, not just the story, but the mechanics of how these systems are bridged, then you have the right mindset for the tech industry. But as Levin found out, being a lone wolf or a professional with a laptop only takes you so far. If you do have the discipline to handle the consequences. If he had used his skills for defense, he'd be a legend of a different kind. Instead, he became a cautionary tale. He was the first to show that in the digital age, a bank's vault isn't made of steel and concrete. It's made of code. And code can always be rewritten. The world of 1994 is gone. UKUNG, dial into a bank's backdoor and start moving millions anymore. At least not is. But the complexity of modern finance has created even bigger, more obscure shadows to hide in. If you want to be the person who can see into those shadows, whether to protect the world's data or to build the next generation of financial tech, you need to understand the history. You need to understand that the first digital bank robbery wasn't a fluke. It was an inevitability. Stay cynical about the unbreakable claims of big corporations. Stay curious about the protocols that run the world. And most importantly, keep your skills sharp. If you're ready to stop being a spectator and start building the kind of setup that can handle real technical challenges, check that link in the description for the PC kit. It's the first step toward having the power you need to navigate this landscape. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Unless the bank decides to cancel my account for telling this story. Stay sharp, stay coding.